Thank you. Great to be here in Bucharest. I'm Paul Lipman, CEO of BullGuard, and I'm going to be talking about how the Internet of Things is really changing fundamentally the security ramifications for consumers like all of us, and how we've been retooling BullGuard to go after this market. So I joined the company about a year ago, and BullGuard, like every other AV company out there, is in a very large market, but it's a market that's declining. And it's declining for the simple reason that PC shipments are contracting. They're going down year after year, just becoming less relevant. And the market's also consolidating, as some of the larger players you may have read about have been combining over the last year or so. And the net result of that for companies like ours is valuation multiples are just not very interesting. You just look at the acquisition of AVG by Avast, which happened earlier this year, just not very exciting in terms of multiple output. And so my remit, as I was hired to come in and run BullGuard, was really pretty simple. Do something interesting with the company. Find a new market to expand into, find a new growth trajectory for BullGuard. So I got my leadership team together off-site. We went to a hotel for a couple of days, locked the doors, and looked at a whole variety of potential new markets for BullGuard. And for each of those, we asked ourselves three critical questions. Firstly, is this a market that BullGuard can not just participate in, but where we have the opportunity to define and lead the market, to become the #1 player in this new expansion market? Number two, is this a market that's poised for really significant growth with real demand drivers behind it that are sustainable? And then number three, is it a market with real tough, unmet customer needs, either in terms of technology or in terms of go-to-market or in terms of business models? So what I'll talk about here is how we went through the process of thinking through each of these three questions and ultimately came to the conclusion that for BullGuard, the right growth market is the Internet of Things. So we're living in the era of the connected home, certainly in the US, the UK. I know it's starting to take off here in Romania. This year alone, we'll see over 5 million new connected devices coming online every single day. And by way of context, that's more than the total number of internet users in Romania every single day. It's a pretty staggering number when you think about it. And the predictions are, within 3 to 4 years, we'll have something like 25 to 30 billion of these devices out there in the world. So these are devices which are bringing real value into our lives. Think of, say, a connected thermostat, makes us more energy efficient. A connected healthcare device makes us fitter and live more healthy lives. Maybe a connected camera that keeps us more safe and secure. We can watch our house when we're away or watch our child, and the list goes on. The dark side, though, of all this progress is these devices typically come, and I think this was mentioned yesterday, typically come with almost nothing in the way of security. So these are just a few stories that I grabbed from The Guardian. It's one of the UK's mainstream newspapers. The first one was a woman in Manchester who discovered to her horror that her baby camera had been hacked. And this hacker not only had a live video feed of her child, but was actually shouting at the child through the loudspeaker that was connected to the baby camera, was actually interacting with this child, some random stranger. And there have been many stories since kind of along the similar lines. The second story, again, I think mentioned yesterday, this is a really interesting one. So about 2 weeks ago, we had a denial of service attack. And this was the largest denial of service attack in history that literally took down half of the internet. Sites like Twitter, LinkedIn, Netflix, literally taken offline, but taken offline by a network of hundreds of thousands of devices in our homes, in all of our homes, digital video recorders, cameras, even routers that have been hacked, infected with malware, and turned into an instrument of cybercrime. The last story here, this guy, for those of you who probably don't recognize him, is James Clapper, who is head of the Department of National Intelligence in the US, the kind of overarching spy agency in the United States. And he came out publicly earlier this year and said, yeah, actually, we kind of like the fact that the Internet of Things is insecure. We're going to use it to spy on people. We're going to make it part of our espionage toolkit. So this is a real significant problem that we have out there. In much the same way that Google is a search engine for content and web links, there's a search engine also for connected devices. It's called Shodan. You can go to shodan.io. It's a pretty complicated system, so we built a very simple scanner on top of that. You can go to the URL here, iotscanner.bullguard.com. You press the button, we grab your public IP address, and we then scan your network. We look for connected devices, and we look for potential vulnerabilities that a hacker could use to get into your devices, to get into your network. On a weekly basis, we're doing 100,000 scans, 100,000 unique networks, of which 5% have some form of vulnerability. Now, 5% doesn't sound like a particularly high number, but if you extrapolate that over the roughly 4 billion connected devices in the world today, that is 200 million devices out there that are potentially vulnerable to attack and compromise. So this is a big problem. It's a problem that's getting bigger. So I want to talk a bit about how do we go about fixing it. But first, an honest admission here from someone in the AV industry, our industry, the antivirus industry, and there's probably people here in the audience who'll take issue with this, but we have done almost nothing in the way of true innovation for over a decade. There's a bell here, there's a whistle there, there's a new feature, but in terms of true fundamental innovation, pretty much nothing. And the reason for this is pretty simple, right? We've got a large market, although now contracting. It's a must-have product. About 95, 98% of people who use PCs have antivirus, and there's high barriers to entry. So it's allowed our industry to be fat, dumb, and happy for a very, very long time. Very profitable companies, growing nicely, haven't really had to think about investing in true innovation. The reality, though, if you think about the Internet of Things and the connected home, it's vastly more complicated than simple PC antivirus. You're talking about heterogeneous environments, multiple devices, multiple device types. You can't run antivirus on these devices. They typically don't have the compute power, they don't have the memory. You typically can't even access them to load software onto them. And networks are fundamentally fragile. It's very easy if you don't know what you're doing, and we've seen others fall into this trap. You can take down a customer's network. You can render it completely unusable. So network is hard, and it's just not in the DNA of the typical antivirus company. So as we thought about this at BullGuard, and we went through a process of several months of really thinking through the plan here, by our estimation, this is within the next 3 to 4 years a $5 billion market, roughly the same size as the PC antivirus market today. And it's a greenfield market. It's wide open, so a really rich market for entrepreneurs and startups. And as we went through this process, like any technology company thinking, okay, how do we get into the market? We went through the typical build versus buy equation, and we looked at it along 3 lines. Firstly, technology. Do we have the technology that we can apply in this market, or do we need to license? Do we need to buy, acquire? Do we have people who have the domain expertise for this new market, or do we have to go out and hire a whole new team, maybe acquire a company and bring it in? And most importantly, is it in our DNA? Is it in our way of developing, our way of thinking, our way of going to market? One of the mistakes you often see larger technology companies doing when they want to enter into a new market is to overreach and say, well, I've got kind of technology that sort of works here, and I've got some people who sort of know it. I'm going to go and form a team, and I'm going to go after that new market. And you find more often than not that they trip up along the way. So the decision we made at BullGuard was we were going to acquire. So in August of this year, we announced the acquisition of a small Israeli consumer cybersecurity startup called Dojo Labs. So this is a team of people who came out of Israel's cyber warfare and cyber intelligence units. They really know their stuff in this area, and they've built a really tremendous product. It's the industry's first true network security solution for the home. And it's backed by a cloud-based machine learning cyber intelligence system that will detect these threats in real time and block them from getting down to the customer's network. So we're really excited about the team, we're really excited about the technology, but really the acquisition is not the end of the story, it's actually just the start. So if you think about technology markets, they're if not winner takes all, they're typically winner takes most. So in any segment that you might think about, over the long term, the top 3 companies in that segment will take 80% of the revenue and 100% of the profit. And that's true whether you're talking about PCs, networking equipment, social networks, ride-hailing apps. Over the long term, this kind of tends to be the case. So if you're here in the audience and you're starting a company, you're running a startup, you're investing in startups, and you're saying to yourself, well, I have a 10 billion euro market, and if I get 1% of that market, I'm going to have a 100 million euro company. The reality is it just doesn't work that way. You've got to really think more carefully about what's the segment of the market you're going after, and importantly, what's the strategy to be number one in that market, which is why at Bullguard, we're putting our people, our resources, our capital behind this. We've made it the number one strategic focus of the company. Now, that's all well and good. On the flip side, the reality is the vast majority of acquisitions fail. They just do. It's just the facts. If you look at the statistics, 70% fail to meet their financial or strategic objectives. So with Dojo, we thought really carefully about how to make this work. And that started months before we even closed the acquisition. We actually got the teams together to build, before the deal had even closed, to build a joint operating plan and a joint financial plan. And that was important to ensure we had buy-in and ownership right up front. There was no room for kind of misunderstanding or missed expectations after the fact. And then we very carefully aligned the personal financial incentives of the Dojo team with the business plan that we built together. So we had the expectations and the plan aligned with the incentives right from the get-go. Pretty rare in acquisitions, but really critical thing to get right. One of the things that oftentimes trips up acquisitions is overzealous integration. You know, you've got a large company with bureaucracy and processes and endless meetings, and it just sucks the life out of a startup, out of a small, innovative team, right? I mean, you think about all the startups that pitched here, they're 2 people, 4 people, 5 people. All of a sudden, they're dropped into a company with 100, 200, 500, 1,000, and all of their enthusiasm goes out of the window. So we were very deliberate with Dojo to have a very light touch, give them the space they needed to innovate, to get product to market, but support them with the resources of the large company where they had gaps, where they had needs, but not overwhelm them with our people and our processes. And so far, again, still early, that seems to be working well. So lastly, really to wrap up here, some of the lessons kind of we've learned going through this process. Number one, most startups will succeed or fail largely down to the people dimension. So it was really important to me early on that we figure out the culture fit, we figure out the compatibility of our people. We spent a lot of time working with the Dojo team to get this right, and really had an open mind and flexibility about thinking, how do we make Bullguard a really great place for the Dojo team to be long-term? Because, look, at the end of the day, you can lock people down with financial incentives, you can put pots of money on the horizon, and incentives and options and all of that good stuff, but what you really need is to harness the enthusiasm and the energy and the passion that a small team has for its product and for its business. So really critical to get that one right. The second one's the importance of simplicity. Simplicity not just in clarity in the vision, in the business model, in the deal rationale. Those are all critical to get buy-in from your investors and your board to get a deal done on both sides of the equation, both from the acquirer and the acquiree. But also, in many cases, it can be as complicated, if not more complicated, to get a small deal done than a large one. So it's important to keep the process simple as well. That not only helps you to retain your sanity as you're going through this on both sides, but also improves the likelihood of a successful outcome. The last one, maybe the most important one, look, doing an acquisition is hard. It's a big step, whether you're the one doing the acquisition or maybe even more so the one being acquired. So my advice for anyone going through this is to be bold. Believe in your vision, believe in your team, believe in your product, believe in your business. Get the deal done. Don't waste a whole lot of time. Get it done as quickly as you can. Momentum kills deals. If you run out of momentum, the deal falls apart. Get the deal done, and then get on with the really exciting business of actually building your company. So it's obviously still early in Bullguard's journey into this Internet of Things market. We're really excited about the opportunity ahead, and I hope that you found it interesting to hear to at least some of our thinking and experiences as we've gone through this process. Maybe if we have a bit of time left, I'm happy to answer any questions, or feel free to email me, come find me later on today. Thank you.